Hi, this is the first in a series of talks I'll be delivering on issues that face all of us and which often cause us pain. It's my hope that through listening to this, you'll be able to receive some benefit from it. You'll be able to navigate life's difficulties a little more smoothly than I myself did. So they're all based on essays I wrote, brief essays, and this first one will be about disappointment. As New Year's rounds the corner each year, a lot of people I know pick up the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible, whatever their sacred text might be, and they begin rereading it, treating it as if it were a suit of armor by which they might better gird themselves for whatever is to come. In this way, we surround ourselves with the past's bulky and ponderous weight, surrounding ourselves with its words and its messages, taking comfort in its reminder that we're not alone, that we are, in fact, among a multitude facing life's uncertainties, disappointments, and sorrows. We immerse ourselves in these pages that whisper of the past, that whisper of our continued existence, and the rustling of their pages is like the blood pulse of a gigantic, infinite wound. One of the books I pick up whenever I'm feeling uncertain hails from China. I'm sure many of you have heard of it before. It's called the I Ching. The I Ching is a sort of instruction manual for how to approach life's changes, and its guidance is packed into verses that reveal the most beneficial attitudes by which we should navigate the ceaseless ebb and flow of life. I use it for the wisdom it conveys, and my hope is that someday I'll comprehend it so thoroughly that I'll be able to locate it not outside of myself in the fragile pages of a book, but within my own bones. But I'm not there yet. And in fact, about 4 years ago, I was driven to the I Ching again when I was delayed ministerial candidacy by a committee called the RSSC. It's a committee that ascertains whether each aspirant to the ministry carries within her the proper background, emotional stability, and objectives. This ministerial board questioned my call, the authenticity of my call to Unitarian Universalism, which is the faith in which I was hoping to become accredited. And they said that before they'd allow me to proceed, I had to complete further activities within Unitarian Universalism to ascertain whether I truly was committed. Somewhere around this same time, a group of ministerial candidates called me mystical, and they questioned whether a mystic really would be happy in the ministry. And these joint assessments devastated me at the time, for it had been, the ministerial aspirations had been my only plan. I didn't have a backup. And I felt I was too old for switching tracks. You know, I'd spent too much money, my graduate degree, this and that. And so I was knocked to the ground. In order to survive emotionally, I once again integrated the I Ching into my life. For months following the event then, each morning, my routine included the transcription of its lessons, of one of its lessons, into a journal. There are 64 lessons actually. This took a good 30 minutes, and then an additional 30 in which I wrote of my own reactions to the lessons in the hope that eventually its wisdom would transform my ragged emotions into ones that no longer scraped at my insides. One lesson in particular affected me, and this was called Twi. Twi, like the path of joy in Hindu philosophy, offers a lesson about removing attachment to specific outcomes. This is what it says. In our search for success and happiness, we are prone to think that we must take aggressive actions to achieve them. But instead of instant gratification, we discover only fleeting satisfaction. For we must not force the path with expectation, but follow it with excitement, expressing wonderment in the unfolding moment. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in endless cycles of expectation and ultimate disappointment. And it occurred to me, after reading this, that often the actions we take to attain happiness actions like obtaining a degree or moving somewhere else, whatever it is might be, become stronger than the reasons that prompted them in the first place. My guess is everybody has experienced this. There are times in which a desire or a goal has broken away from its mooring and floats tetherless, growing independent from and even larger than the reason that originally spawned it. And it's during times like these, perhaps, that we need a group to pop up its rather unpleasant little head and say, wait a minute, is it a job as a minister that you want? Or are you merely searching for deeper spirituality? Or perhaps to someone else it may say, wait a minute, is it a new house you want, a bigger house, so your kids will have more room? Or is what you really want is for your kids to learn how to share, or how to convey their own needs and listen to the needs of others? So, before we take care of these desires that we each have, these desires that never stop, but instead seem to multiply like frantic rabbits, perhaps we should take a look at the gain we might get from delaying them and from working through the motivation that prompted them. The other night I was reading an article about Abraham Lincoln that really struck home as it pertains to this topic. Because in the article I learned that not only did Lincoln face continual obstacles blocking his passage, such as poverty, failed elections, the deaths of people he loved, like his beloved son, but also, possibly worse than all the others, was depression, chronic, major depression. The author of the article, Joshua Schenck, describes how Lincoln's gloom was familiar to everyone he knew, for he often wept, recited maudlin poetry, and told jokes and stories at very odd times in order to control his depression. As a young man, he talked more than once about suicide, and as he grew older, he described the world as grim and hard and full of misery. No element of Mr. Lincoln's character described, or rather declared his colleague Henry Whitney, was so marked, obvious, and ingrained as his mysterious and profound melancholy. And his law partner William Herndon once said, his melancholy dripped from him as he walked. And yet, Lincoln continued, despite these challenges, perhaps even because of them, because somehow they added to his substance, and he wrote about this. Somehow he was able to transform them into something that worked for him rather than destroyed him. In the words of the author of the article, Schenck, Lincoln was a man whose depression spurred him painfully to examine the core of his soul, whose hard work to stay alive helped him develop crucial skills and capacities, even as his depression lingered hauntingly. So, in a much less heroic fashion, and against a much less compelling historical background, I also worked to gain insight from my own disappointment. 4 years after the ministerial committee expressed hesitancy over the authenticity of my aspirations, I'm now on an entirely different track. As my colleagues and my ministerial committee had suspected, the ministry didn't really address the motivation or the need that had impelled me onto the ministerial path in the first place. And I eventually realized that. Alfred Whitehead, a theologian I studied, conceives of reality as an evolutionary process in which everything and everyone is always constantly in a state of becoming. And I suppose I'm living proof of this. But I think we all are. For not one of us is the same person we were a year ago. Of course, our genetic structures remain the same, and the basic themes that frame our dreams remain the same, but otherwise we're constantly changing. Not just our skin cells, our bone cells, our liver cells, which, by the way, are replaced so frequently that 3 months from today, you'll be your body will be most entirely new. But our personalities also incrementally shift. Relationships alter us. What we see and watch and read, these things alter us. Hardships, delays, sorrows, they also alter us. You know, even though we never appreciate their arrival, by the time we emerge from them, we're changed. In our search for, this is what the I Ching reads, in our search for success and happiness, we are prone to think that we must take aggressive actions to achieve them. But whatever is won by the desirous, ambitious, demanding manipulations of the ego will soon be lost. Life is full of shortcuts, but by steadfastly holding true to what each of us deems as most correct, we arrive at true joy. Through examining our motivations, through persevering through difficulties, as did Lincoln, and through being open to the changes that constantly work to reframe us, we arrive at true joy. Or if not true joy, then at least self-knowledge. And hopefully we'll develop into wiser versions of our original selves along the way. So that's it for this first talk. If you want to read the transcript, go over any little section, you can go to my website. It's lodestarastrology.com, and you can read other articles there, and there are other things also on that website. But until next time, have a nice month.